Laborers or workers is the name given to a group of people who have in the past built and built economies. When we go to the Middle East, we know about the Asians who worked tirelessly to see the Asian economy grow. We look at Eastern Europe as well, the coal mines. All these have grown at the hands of laborers. Even in Uganda, we look at the coffee industry, the cotton industry, have all been built on the sweat of people who we refer to as laborers or workers. We also know that governments have fallen and risen at the hands of laborers. We have heard and read about the labor unions across the world. So by all means, this is a very vital group of people in both economic and social terms, but also in the political realms of this globe. But at the same time, not so much attention is given to them. More so here in Uganda, the rate of unemployment continues to heighten. So we are here to evaluate the crisis or the situation of labor, of the youth labor force in Uganda, as well as attempt to anticipate any future prospects. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this episode of the Youth Roundtable. I'm joined by, of course, a panel of distinguished ladies and a gentleman so far. We expect another panelist to be joining us just in a moment. But I will just introduce them so you can get to hear their voices, and also they can say hello to you before we begin the show officially. And I'll begin from my extreme right, is a friend and comrade, a student of law at the Uganda Christian University, but also the Secretary for Legal Affairs of the National Youth Council. Kanyesigye, you're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, moderator, for granting me this opportunity to join you on this Youth Roundtable. My name is Kanyesigye, Secretary for Legal Affairs National Youth Council. I am here to discuss about the issue of unemployment, and I'm glad to join you people. Thank you so much.
Yes, many thanks for joining us, Comrade Mercy. Next to Mercy is a very smart gentleman. I must say I like the texture of the coat. The gentleman is by the names of Komakech. Komakech joins us all the way from the National Resistance Movement Secretariat. I also know that he coordinates the NRM in the institution of IPOD. Komakech, you're most welcome. You can say hello to our viewers and maybe something that I've forgotten to say about you.
Most obliged, Kidega. I don't think there's anything you've forgotten, except that I'm a rice farmer. But I'm very humbled to, I think this is my maiden appearance at the Youth Roundtable. Happy to be here.
Yeah, we are happy to have you as well, and we look forward to tapping into your knowledge. Next to Komakech and next to me is a now seasoned and very frequent face on the Youth Roundtable, Scovia Aweko. She's a PhD candidate of political behavior, focusing on migration and displacement. Scovia, yes, the viewers have heard your voice before, but there is always a new, something new each time you speak, so maybe.
Right. Thank you, Kidega, for having me here once again. And, as usual, I'm excited to be here and to hear how this, discussion is going to go.
Yeah, thank you. To the viewers, you've heard from our panelists that have introduced themselves. Let's now cut to the chase. Let us begin playing the draft right away. And Koma, being the only gentleman on the show, I'll give you the honors of kicking us off. Oh, the only gentleman so far on the show.
Yes.
So I'll give you the honors of kicking us off. And my first question is, just like our theme for today's conversation goes, the status of the youth labor force in the country. Let us begin from there. In your own perspective, from where you're seated, what is the status of the youth labor force in Uganda?
Okay, that's a very broad question. So, first statistics. We have a population of about, an estimated population of about 45 million people. Now, about 77% of these are young people, 25 years and below. And you could segment the remaining population, the 23, to maybe about 15 from 25 to 35, and then the rest takes the smaller margin. Now, out of these, the youth unemployment rate is at between 64 to 70%. And every single year, we receive about 600,000 to 700,000 young people into the labor market every single year. And the country can only swallow 9,000 of these every year. So we have a balance, or if we have to go with the higher figure of 700,000, of about 69,000, something like that, that are left to either start their own businesses or move into agriculture, or those that are left to, just idle around. So that's the situation. And actually, World Bank projects that by 2030, that figure, the 700,000, is going to move up to 1 million. So we're going to have a problem in the next 15 or so years. So the challenge of government right now is to increase the rate at which they swallow this labor force, which has not been a very easy thing. So just to give you a big picture, that is the status. And that informs, I think, part of our topic as to why many young people are yearning to move out to the Middle East, to Europe, in search for employment opportunities.
Yeah,
I think for now we can.
Yeah, that's fair enough. And I just don't want to preempt the conversation yet. So I'll just allow Mercy and Scovia equally give us their own view about what they think is the status of the youth labor force. And I'm glad that you brought out the numbers very well. But I'm sure there's a thing or two that is still maybe hasn't been said. So I will give Mercy a chance.
Maybe Kidega, just to add something, the literacy rate among young people is at 89%. But the 89% is basic literacy, which means knowing how to read and write.
No
just
skill,
to add that.
no tangible and valuable skill.
Yeah.
Okay, Mercy, let us just hear your own opinion regarding what you think is the status of the youth labor force in this country. A broad view of what you think.
Okay, thank you so much, moderator. First and foremost, I would love to define for you who a youth is. A youth, according to the National Youth Council Act 1993 as amended, is defined as someone who is between the age of 18 to 30. However, the youth policies, they always define youth as someone above 15 years to 30 years. So the status of labor force is that according to the Financial Statistics Bureau of 2020, it shows that 78% of the people stay in rural areas, then 27 in urban areas. But in rural areas, you find that these people, their economic activity is agriculture. You get? So that means the majority of people are being employed by the agriculture in rural areas. But the challenge we have is that in these rural areas, either these young people are doing subsistence farming, which is not benefiting them at all because they cannot manage the standard of living. They have to go to school. They have to sustain their families because most of them, they have families. Not everyone is in school. They have to sustain their families. We have that challenge that they are not doing something productive to them. They just do for their own consumption.
Chitu choka. There's what the president says.
Yes.
Chidachonka.
But with the introduction of the parish development model, I have a feeling that the government may pull out these young people into commercial agriculture. How? By using the parish development model plans, pillars. As you are aware, there is the pillar of community mobilization. You understand that Ministry of Gender is under that obligation to mobilize young people to how they can do it, how they can access the market. When they get challenges, where do they go? How should they do it? And then secondly, I think there is the pillar of financial inclusion. You all know that young people do not have enough capital. Where these people do subsistence farming, not because that they do not want, but they do not have enough capital, like tractors, you get. But with the parish development model, they are going to give them some financial support. You are aware that the government is intending to put 100 million at the parish level, whereby the young people will get 30%. So I have a feeling if young people will also work hard as the government is trying to push us, we work hard and we, we can do commercial production.
Yeah, fair enough. I love it that you're quite optimistic and you have, so many prospective feelings about how we can transform our youth, productive agenda. But let's just hear from Scovia. Scovia, you've heard from the other corner. What's your own opinion?
I think Mercy actually preempted some of the things that I was going to say. But to start off, before we even start talking about the status of youth labor, we need to define what we mean by labor. Because in many cases, you're thinking of youth, the youth actually entering the formal labor market, right? When in actual sense, in Uganda, we have lots and lots of people who are informally employed. And when they're informally employed, we don't consider them as productive or contributing to our economy. And we have groups of people, especially women, who especially do domestic labor that are left out of these conversations because their work is not considered productive. Whereas you cannot have the regular jobs that we have without having domestic labor type of thing. But after saying that, we cannot talk about youth unemployment without talking about some of the barriers to entry, especially in the Ugandan, right? Labor market, there's a lot of corruption. You have stories of people having to bribe someone in order to get an interview. You have stories of ageism, where if you are a young person who, let's say, is tiny and skinny like me, you walk into someone's office and they tell you you're not old enough to be here, so, or they don't see you as qualified enough to actually be able to get into certain positions when in fact you actually are.
Qualified.
You are qualified, exactly. And so thinking about those barriers to entry and how we can actually combat them so that, as Mr. Komakech says, we can absorb more of the youth into the labor force. Yeah.
But yeah, and thank you. And let me just stick with you, Scovia, because in your submission, you seem to suggest that the only way through which we can absorb, our graduates is in the formal sector, or maybe in the public sector, if I'm to say. But there's so many other avenues through which we can create opportunities and jobs for young people. For example, if we explored innovation, yeah, we could. It's a whole sector that we can tap into and create so many jobs for our young people.
Right. No, so, I agree with you that the formal labor market is not the only way to actually keep people unemployed. That's why I started by saying we should define what labor is, because the informal sector is just as important as the formal sector. And therefore, if we just focus on the formal sector, we are dismissing the efforts, the productivity of all the others who are actually contributing to our economy. And that's why I brought up the domestic workers in Uganda, who are especially, young people, young women from the ages of 18 to about 35. And they themselves are contributing to the economy in a whole lot of different ways that we tend to not recognize. The hawkers, the people who are selling in Owino, right? The only problem is that our youth are actually trained for the formal sector, not the informal sector. And that's where we see a lot of people devaluing these other economic opportunities, because that is not where their skills should be applied in the first place. So,
thank you. Komakech, let me come to you. You see, even before we begin to analyze the question of unemployment, we must understand the problem itself. Where is this problem coming from? And maybe we could look at one very important aspect, which is the education system and the education sector. When Uganda became under the British protectorate, we adopted so many of the British ways of doing things, the British education, and so many things that could not have exactly been desired for the African child. So, and it looks like even up to today, we are still following the British or colonial education system. So people have argued that at times young people go to school, but the skills they acquire at school, there is a big gap between the skills they acquire versus the skills required in the labor market. So that imparity, that difference, therefore, makes them not even suitable for the labor market. That even if the jobs are there, some people actually just don't have the skills. They have gone to school and they go for a training, but they just cannot, pass the interview. Yes, we can decide to blame things like corruption. Yes, they exist, but how about us doing our role? Acquiring the skills that we have to acquire, so that tomorrow, let the system fail you, but don't fail yourself. So let's speak about the education system. Do you think that this system has partially or to a greater extent contributed to the fact that we have a high level of unemployment? And if so, how can we go about with how can we go around with that, with the issue of unemployment? Do we have to revise the curriculum entirely? Do we have to have an overhaul of the education system? We just abolish everything and begin afresh? What can we do about the education system?
Okay. Thank you, Ndugu Kidega. So it is true that partially education plays a significant role in the process of development. And that part of the skills mismatch that you're seeing in the economy is actually a creation of an education system that does not match the contemporary skills that employers are looking for.
Okay.
So that is partly true. Because if you look at some of the jobs that our education system is preparing graduates for,
okay,
you find a very big mismatch with the jobs that are available right now. Government of Uganda adopted a private sector-led approach to development.
That is true.
Which then brought in a lot of competition and foreign investment, which means that you no longer have only local companies to compete for.
Yes.
Most of the companies that are actually here and are big companies are organizations that have come from out. Highly competitive. You have to be at the top of your game. And there are skills that every single organization requires of a graduate, for instance, or of a laborer, at least. Yeah? And these skills are not taught in school. For instance, writing. Writing is a very fundamental skill.
Negotiation.
That cuts across. But I sit at the NRM Secretariat, and while at IPOD, I was implementing a capacity strengthening program for young politicians.
Yeah.
But one of the challenges that you find, even with a facilitator, a youth facilitator, they can't write their CV, curriculum vitae.
Yeah.
Someone cannot write their biography.
Yeah.
So someone cannot draft concept notes, business proposals, and these are core elements of the workforce right now.
That's
because true. Then you're going to move into managing projects. In managing projects, you have to report about success of projects. And these are things that many organizations consider core.
Yeah.
And our education system is not preparing graduates for these.
Yeah.
But Kidega, this problem is broader. I believe that the bigger issue to tackle is actually mindset change. After 9/11, there were two contending views that came from two professors. And one of the professors argued that the reason as to why we were seeing a resurgent rise in terrorism was because you have two different societies in the world. One were societies who did not question their culture. In other words, they lived within their culture as an end in itself, not a means to an end. Okay. And then you had societies that actually questioned their culture. And in that way, the culture evolved. Okay? And that informed Mahmoud Mamdadi's book, Good Muslim, Bad Muslim.
Okay.
And that's the same problem we have here. You have a society that is deeply rooted in an old-fashioned archaic culture. And that's one of the problems that actually the World Bank points out in their report, 2020 report. You have a group of people, because 70% of our labor force is actually in agriculture. But what are they doing? 90% of them are doing subsistence agriculture.
Yeah.
And that is the culture. Just go to the garden, whether you have 1,000 acres, plow for food, just for eating. That's the mindset. No one is thinking about commercial agriculture to get money. And that is why the president has come out to lead this revolution. And World Bank says, if only Uganda can tackle that, okay, and transform from subsistence agriculture to commercial, that mindset change, if we can change that, because honestly speaking, why I say education may not be a bigger problem is because, Kidega, me and you know, we have our networks, we know a lot of uneducated people who are thriving in business.
That's true.
It's because of their mindset.
That's true. Yeah.
You know, they're thriving in business. They don't even have so many skills, but the mindset.
Yeah, they have the right mindset.
I have my grandmom, she owns over 1,000 acres of land, but she only uses about 10 acres for sweet potatoes and what for eating. And it's a culture in now, I know if you're in war, you know that our culture has always been one that promotes food security above all.
Yes.
You know, and that's why we have the small things like dero, you know, where we put our food, we keep our food there, and that is the most important aspect of our society. Keep food for food security.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, Aweko, yes, Scovia.
I actually wholly disagree with you. Ugandans are one of the most entrepreneurial people, especially in Africa. But there are institutional challenges that prevent them from prevents their businesses from succeeding. And one of those is our high tax rate. But that aside, you talked about people not adopting commercial agriculture. I don't think it's a problem of them not having the mindset, right? It is a problem of access. How many people can afford tractors to go farm their land? How many people can actually afford to, let's say, pay for the seedlings that we sell here in Kampala? Me, you, and Kidega are all from northern Uganda, right? The levels of poverty in northern Uganda is very alarming. So when you say that your grandmother has over 10 acres of land and she's only using 3, is it because she does not want to use all of that land, or she has no other way of utilizing that land, right? One of the things that I know people have been doing of lately is leasing their land, especially in Acholi land. And that is one way of actually being productive, right? If you cannot use your land, give it to somebody else who can come and use it. And those people in the end tend to actually exploit the owners of this land. But to suggest that we Ugandans, yes, there is a need for mindset change, but that is not the problem behind youth unemployment. It's lack of access to some of these things like funding and, you know, skills that you mentioned before, the education that they need to actually go forth and try other things.
Yeah.
Maybe just to put a joiner to that. Yeah, it's true that there are bottlenecks at institutional level. They are there. But how do you explain a scenario of a person, 2 people, same class, they're all peasants, they own 1,000 acres of land, but one is progressing, the other is not progressing.
Okay, I don't think you can have a peasant who owns 1,000 acres of land. That's impossible.
The World Bank description of poverty is someone who is below $1 a day. I don't think.
Yes, but a peasant is not going to own 1,000 acres of land because they're most likely going to sell off that land.
Anyway, so you know, in Acholi, land is sacred. It belongs to both the living, the dead, and the ancestors. So it's not something that you can sell easily. And that's part of the thing that I'm talking about, that mindset change, the culture that is deeply ingrained within our society, that we need to change. We need to begin to question certain aspects of our culture and modernize it. What works can stay, what doesn't work and takes us behind should go. I agree with that, with the institutional mechanisms. It is true. But you see, how many people do we have? We've had a lot of interventions by government, especially in terms of commercial agriculture. The seeds you're talking about. I was Kidega, I worked with Mercy Corps after my degree. And I was an intern there. One of the challenges that we're actually dealing with was still mindset. Even when you are providing good quality seeds to the people for free. For free. Someone is still going to get the seeds and either eat them the way they are or plant them for food and keep the others saying, this one I'll plant next season for food again. So it's a very, I mean, I don't think there's anything. Yeah?
I have a quick question.
No,
so,
I think it's unfair. I need to bring in
what did you do to change the mindset at that time, knowing that people were doing this?
It's talking to people. It's talking to people and showing people success stories of how some people have transformed their lives. You know,
and was that effective?
with that thinking. Yeah, it was effective. It's
so
effective.
then there's no need for like a whole culture reset.
No, and that's what government of Uganda is doing. If you've listened to the message of the head of state, it has been, let us please move away, okay, from this idea of subsistence agriculture to commercial. You know, I mean, he has written a whole book that elaborates how he changed the entire Ankole cattle corridor of people who were just nomads, just moving around from here up to Tanzania. Yet you could keep, you know, you could just, by keeping, just paddock your cattle and get milk out of it. But in our culture, I have a friend, his name is Raymond. I remember the time when we were at campus together. He didn't have school fees, but his father owned about 500 heads of cattle. But he told him, I can't sell my cows.
Wow.
That's true.
They are sacred to me.
That is what we call primitive accumulation of capital. Yeah.
So of course, there are a lot of young people that I know are very hardworking, have the right attitude, and because of other institutional issues like corruption, you know, they've not been able to make it. Those are there, and we also need to deal with that. Yeah, she's right.
I think my own opinion about this debate between the two of you is that is that I agree that there are cultural factors that have been impeding development, you know, and this we cannot run away from it. When you go to the Greater Karamoja region, what he's saying is actually true, that there are people who still believe that my cattle is my cattle. I cannot sell it, I cannot, you know, because imagine how much they would do if they sold their cattle and maybe got this tangible money and therefore maybe invested in a business. But also you make a valid argument that, you know, there are institutional bottlenecks, you know, and that the government has a role to play. The issues around taxation, the issues around policy, you know, have to be addressed, and that is the role of government, you know, and I think that's where I want to bring in Comrade Mercy. Mercy, my question to you, let me just give it a whole big background, that Uganda's economy took, like Koma said, it is a private sector-led economy, which means that the forces of demand and supply, you know, literally take the day, you know. Government has very limited interventions in terms of setting price ceilings or even in terms of intervening. And that's why today we are suffering with the crisis of high prices in the country. But I think that government has a fundamental role to play. And the question is around government's commitment and willingness to actually empower young people. Because of the high levels of unemployment, many young people cannot find employment in the formal sector, right? They cannot go to the offices and work for government. So many of them have now resorted to online businesses. You know, they get their clothes from wherever they get them from, put them on WhatsApp, put them on Instagram and sell, and they get a living out of it. But there are high taxes on this data. You know, Facebook remains closed up to today. So that to me poses a question of, where does our government lie? Do they really want to, encourage entrepreneurship or encourage innovation? If yes, then do you achieve that by having high taxes on data and by having platforms like Facebook, which have demonstrated to be a potential capacity or platform to grow businesses? I don't know, the issue of policy. Do you think we are still lacking and therefore young people continue to be unemployed because of the lacuna in the law and lack of policies that are actually pro youth-led development? I don't know.
Yeah, thank you, moderator. Maybe to start with, I will start by noting that we should know that 14% young people are doing service sector, right? But according to the World Bank report, that is 2015, it shows that 80% of the business collapsed before the first birthday. You get? The reason was, it was because of high taxes levied on youth businesses. You understand, Kidega, that young people do not have enough capital with them. Even the little they have got to start up their business, they cannot sustain because of high taxes. And not only the taxes, actually we also have the financial literacy, like little knowledge about business. Kidega, we also know that young people, some of them do business, but that's like, you find a graduate, is a lawyer, he has never done any business, but is doing business, you get? at the end of the day, you find someone getting that capital is using it for other stuff. Trust me, that business will not
work.
stay. But on the issue of taxation, I feel like the government.
So is that the point where we say that, look here, around the issue of policy, why can't we introduce maybe in the curriculum an aspect of entrepreneurship that maybe as soon as you join your senior one, they begin to teach you basic entrepreneurship skills. How do you account for money? How do you balance your books? I mean, basic entrepreneurship skills, so that when I graduate as a lawyer, I've attained some skills of entrepreneurship, and therefore that question would not arise.
Yeah, I think true that.
We have that already, no?
We do have entrepreneurship at what
and
level?
Commerce. All level, there's schools, at least when I was in secondary school.
But it's optional, right?
Yeah,
No, it's optional.
It's not
So no,
compulsory.
policy needs to be more, intentional and say, from senior 1 to senior 6, you're doing a compulsory entrepreneurship course,
but even
or a compulsory ICT course, for example.
Yeah, even at campus, I feel like the government we should incorporate the vocational training into our curriculum schools, so that maybe it should not actually stop at the senior 6. It should go up to the university. You put that business thing in all courses, so that if I'm a lawyer and I've failed to make it, I can get my little knowledge and capital, start up a business, than waiting to go for my profession. Actually, recently I was talking to my friend. This person is he has just finished LDC, and this gentleman, he was employed by one of the law firm in town. I was shocked someone to tell me that they are going to give him 400. It was like, Mercy, I cannot do this. I just felt bad in my heart. I'm like, how is this possible? Trust me, 400 cannot even cater for your lunch and transport. So really, I feel like it's high time for the government to take these things very serious. Actually, before I forget, tomorrow as National Youth Council, we are going to petition the speaker about the issue of put tax incentive on youth-led businesses. Actually, that's going to happen tomorrow.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow. So I can see you're not only lamenting, but you're actually finding solutions to some of these problems. And I think that is the way that we need to go. But also, a very interesting thing is that as soon as government begins to dictate some of these things, we shall see lawyers coming out to say, this is against, human rights. Let someone choose to do what they wish to do, and why should you cajole and force someone to study ICT? I'm sure with the way our lawyers are stubborn here in Uganda, I'm sure some of them will come out to say, no, let us liberalize even the education sector. Don't force someone to do entrepreneurship. If they believe that they can make the best lawyer in the world, then please let them focus on that.
I think
specialization.
There's a way to go about that that still gives people the freedom or the choices that lawyers would want them to do, right? But I look at the example of the US, where especially at the undergrad, there are certain general education courses that everyone should take, and even if you are a person who is doing STEM, right, you still have to take a social science course, something like that. And so we could. I guess this precedent, right? There are other examples that we could follow that doesn't really mean that you're shackling people to just, do this because the government said so, but you could give people alternatives, right? Yeah. You could take, as I said, a lot of people don't know how to write. You could take a writing course, a business writing course where you learn how to write concept notes and all of that, or you could take an ICT course because you're interested in learning about digital marketing or whatever.
Yeah. Oh, fair enough.
Sure. Kidega, you see, let's be pragmatic. I agree with the two ladies, but you see, if you are championing a private sector-led development approach, world over, the responsibility for government is to create an enabling environment to ensure that the private sector creates these jobs. Now, there are exceptional circumstances. For instance, if you're moving into a highly risky but also essential job market, and the Americans have done this. It is not true that in a capitalist system, governments don't intervene. In the US, for instance, to prepare the country for clean energy, the US invested a lot of money in research, research to inform investments and businesses that, look here, if you want to come into this business, we think if you have capital of this amount, these are the areas that you can tap into. Yeah?
Yeah.
But if it is not a highly risky business and a new venture, yeah, then all that government needs to do is, one, provide the enabling environment, ensure that there's peace, security, and political stability. Two, ensure that at least, okay, the rate of borrowing, interest rate, okay, is affordable. And I think for me, where I think government, I can fault government, is on that. There's no way you're going to transform an economy with those high interest rates.
Yeah.
It is so difficult.
So you think our fiscal policy is still...
It is just so difficult. Yeah. Look at the people that are thriving here. Many of them. The Asians. Do you know why the Asians are thriving? The Asians go and borrow. They borrow money from the UK through their relatives with low interest rates, and they are competing with Ugandans who are borrowing money at an interest rate of 18%. Why is that going to take you?
Nowhere.
You know? For me, I think that's where I can fault government.
Yeah.
But I think government has also done a lot in terms of creating an enabling environment, ensuring that there's infrastructure for regional trade and for the movement of goods, you know.
From point A to point B.
Yeah, and electricity, you see a lot of strides in creating access to electricity, you know. So for my part, especially the issue to do with waiving of taxes, I don't agree with it.
Really?
I really don't agree with it. That's laziness. Let me tell you, profits, okay? Profits are calculated after you have taken off taxes.
Okay.
The major problem here is lack of capacity. Young people need mentorship. They don't even need an education. They need training and mentorship, and which is what the government of Uganda started doing.
Yes.
Yeah. Let me tell you something, Kidega. It is so difficult for a young person from nowhere to come and begin developing good writing skills, okay, and match the person here.
Yes.
Unless they have gone through someone who is mentoring them, ensuring that they can correct them, train them, you know, and that's what government of Uganda is doing in partnership with UNDP and the Ministry of Gender. They have started an internship program for graduates. And what they're actually telling graduates that you don't need experience to come for this. Come the way you are, and we shall train you. We look at your competences, the ones that you've developed, your educational background, and throw you to a field and give you someone who is going to provide leadership to you and mentor you, you know, to develop the skills that are required for the current labor market.
Yeah. Yes, sure, Mercy.
Okay. My brother, I totally disagree with you. The issue of the taxation, it is really disturbing young people. It is not about laziness. Trust me, there are young people who are sharp more than you expect outside there. They are really sharp. They really know what they want. These people, they have passed through a lot. Trust me, if they get that opportunity, trust me, we shall do better.
Let me ask you, for instance, let me ask a question.
Yeah,
okay. How much money does government levy on agriculture?
No, for the agriculture, they don't do. But
just a simple question.
Yeah. No. Uganda, for sure. I am not very well versed with our financial...
I am now telling you, there are absolutely no taxes.
See, for agriculture,
you know?
We started off, right. Go ahead.
Okay,
no,
for
sure,
agriculture, they don't tax. But we are looking to other people who are doing business here in Kampala, even other places. You've started up, you're selling some clothes, you're doing something.
Yeah.
KCC will come, they want tax. Trust me. That
but
business
you see,
going to
wait, can I say something
quickly?
quickly?
Okay, sure.
Koma is comparing apples to oranges. You cannot do that.
Exactly.
We started off by saying subsistence farming, you know, like that's what our youth, you know, especially in the rural areas are talking about. And now we have the youth here in the urban areas who are trying to set up businesses. And those businesses are heavily taxed, right? And so you cannot tell me that both of these categories of people are lazy because they're complaining about one group is not taxed and you're telling me that their work is not productive. The other is trying and you're telling them they're lazy because they're complaining about the amount of taxes that they have to incur.
Fine. Maybe just
please go ahead.
To wrap it up. How then do you expect? Because I just gave you, we started this discussion with statistics, and statistics are really key. You know, how do governments collect revenue that helps them to actually spur development?
We're not saying that there shouldn't be tax. It's the
amount,
it's the level of taxes that people have to pay.
They collect that money through taxes. Now here you have a population that 80% of it is young people. And you're saying those 80%, they should pay minimum taxes. And yet, remember, okay, that out of those, okay, about 20 million are 16 years and below. They are dependents. Who are they depending on? Their parents and government. Government has to provide free healthcare. Government has to provide free primary and secondary education. Where are they going to get that money from if you reduce those taxes drastically?
Okay, fine. But we're giving land left, right, and center, and so giving investors, foreign investors, tax breaks because they're investors, right? Like, do you see the imbalance? You want these poor youth to pay exorbitant amounts of taxes, but the investors actually have the finances not to be taxed?
The investors, my understanding of the government approach to foreign investors is based on, one, how long is it going to take for someone to break even? And what is the nature of someone's business? If you're an investor and you're coming to employ 1,200 people, 2,000 people, even if you are a local, there are tax incentives for you. How much taxes is Professor Guang paying on COVID?
Can you actually tell us the tax incentives for the regular person?
No, I think now it might be difficult to get the actual figures of these tax maybe exemptions. But I think the point being made by the two ladies, is that
it's actually in the law.
Is that taxation must be a deliberate policy. And to just maybe justify the point, I take you back to 1928, when the USA Secretary of State, Alexander Hamilton, introduced the Smoot-Hawley tariff. And the idea was that how can we protect the domestic local producers of America at the expense of foreign direct investors. And what they did was to levy very high taxes on foreign direct investors, levy high taxes on import, whereas subsidize the domestic investors. Today, we celebrate the Wall Street companies, but there was a deliberate government approach to ensure that the domestic investors are protected. But what these ladies are saying is that our approach as a country, the economy is an outward-looking economy. Yes, we attract investors, that is true. We give them all the tax holidays, we give them free land, but at the expense of the domestic investors. Because at the end of the day, these foreign investors remit a greater percentage of the profits that they make back to their home countries and leave only peanuts back in our country. The most we get from them is maybe through taxation, maybe those who have been lucky to expand their businesses, employ our young people, but under even inhuman working conditions. So I think that we must move towards supporting domestic investment. And I think that is the argument being made by the two ladies. But also, you make a good point that we cannot expect government to pluck money off the tree, because that then leads government to borrowing. If you don't have an economy that is working, if the economy is not generating income, then who will you tax? There is no one who you will tax. Then when you fail to tax, then you're forced to borrow. Then when you're forced to borrow, the economic question is not answered. So you make a valid point that government needs to find money to provide social services. But so to me, the solution is to create a wider tax base. Okay, let us broaden the tax base so that if we are to tax, we are taxing from almost everything, however small. There the tax burden will not be felt at an individual or at per unit level. And Musalia Mudavadi, who is a candidate for president in Kenya, I think he has ever since withdrawn his ambitions and joined Deputy President William Ruto, actually described a very good economic strategy on how to avoid double taxation. But I think we shall begin from there after the break. I see it's getting so economical, and yet I want us to keep it to a way that our viewers really appreciate. Yeah, but I think this brings us to the end. Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
Yeah, no. You can make the point.
Maybe something I just wanted to add that I had forgotten. I talked about the issue of government favoring the investors and the citizens of Uganda. I want to remind you that we, up to now, we don't have a minimum wage. Trust me, these investors, they come here and they exploit our young people.
Yeah.
They are given little money, seriously, on top of that. So I think, for sure, the government, it should at least first give youth-led businesses for like 3 years, first stabilize. Let them get capital and then they can tax. That's my suggestion, actually.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I mean, the Youth Roundtable is about exploring suggestions and opinions. So we shall explore more of these after the short commercial break. Otherwise, we hope you are enjoying the Youth Roundtable. Please feel free to put your comments in the comment section. If you agree with any of the panelists, let us know. But also, if you disagree with any of them, give us your alternative opinion regarding the subject matter. As of now, we take a short commercial break and see you shortly after this.
As a key principle to good governance and democracy, freedom of expression allows every citizen to speak their mind. It is a fundamental human right that permits citizens free expression on matters that affect societies, access information, and hold policymakers and leaders accountable. But these rights normally do not come cheap, and as such, citizens should be aroused every now and then to reclaim the shrinking civic space. Be part of the conversation every day on the Civic Space TV online as we dissect on the measures to reclaim one of the fundamental rights that allows every citizen to speak their mind. Civic Space TV. Freedom always.
We'll be back from that short commercial break, and thank you for keeping it the Youth Roundtable. We shall dive straight into phase 2 of this conversation, and like I promised you, that we shall be joined by a fourth panelist, and we are glad that, the break caught us when he had joined us already, Comrade Lawel. He is a regular on the show. Lawel, you're most welcome. Do you want to say hello to our viewers and maybe say something brief about yourself?
Thank you so much. I would want to say it's always a pleasure being back on the Youth Roundtable. I would like to, I hope it will be an interesting discussion. Thank you so much.
Actually, your hopes have been met. It has been a very interesting conversation. Tempers have been going high and voices have been going high and low, but yeah, but Koma hopes to tap into your masculine now that you're joined him for support. But I know that yes, but I know that you'll give us your independent opinion. So we began off by really drawing our own perspectives regarding the labor situation in Uganda. So let me just pick your own view. What do you think is the labor analysis? What is the status quo of the youth labor force in Uganda?
Unfortunately, you may not have an ally in me, given that I'm myself unemployed. But what I should say is, if we were to have this discussion away from the ideal to the reality, is that we cannot perhaps expect things like full labor rights, good conditions of work, or duration of working hours, because our economy does not allow us to do so. What we have is that you have a lot of labor supply, but you have you don't have the jobs available, which means that the big pool of people who are looking for jobs are going to compete for the few jobs that are available, and the people who have the jobs have no incentives of making them better, of putting in place better working conditions, paying you highly because they can dismiss you and get someone else. I don't know if you get. So I think what we have is, because of current climate of our labor market, is that we are forced to fight for the little we have. So, but I think if we are, like the youth discuss way forward, I think government must, of course, deliberately make sure it balances that labor market, to make sure we're not in a situation where we have to fight for even jobs that are not ideal, that are not of our profession, that do not meet the minimum good working conditions. So government, I think, has a duty to go ahead and create such conditions. And I think to do that, government should be able, for example, to look in things like more of industrialization, setting up factories, etc., that consume a lot of people, as opposed to things like agriculture and these giving out of seedlings. Because you realize that agriculture as a sector is not, its demand is not elastic. That is to say, if Kidega has been consuming 2 packets of coffee, that's what they will demand for all until they produce, and maybe their family has increased. So the rate agriculture, for me, I don't think it is that can sustain us, can create a lot of jobs. I think the best thing to do for us is to go into industrialization, and of course that includes government prioritizing its making its priorities straight, as opposed to spending a lot in administrative costs, creating new districts, as opposed to, there are those investments that really do not bring returns. There are those sectors of the economy that don't bring those returns. So I think it will go back to government prioritization. There's a time in Kenya where NGOs were providing about 20% of youth jobs. I think that is speaks to the idea that government should also look into these other stakeholders who have capacity to contribute to the development of the country. Our policy, governments, I don't know, because of unresolved political questions, government seems to suffocate those that are not in its good political books. And because we want force, for example, NGOs as players in this labor market to conform to their government actions, even when they violate rights, human rights, etc. Government suffocates them, but they forget that these also play a role in our society. For example, labor, these have capacity to employ people through investing in villages. You have these CBOs, etc., that consume a lot of people. Government alone, especially developing countries, cannot answer the labor questions. So I think we need to look into industrialization. You need to understand that currently we also have a lot of the youth driven by internet, but you have a country which is making it very hard for the youth to access internet, because if you're putting an if you're putting a tax on access of internet, then it means you're making it hard for the youth to enjoy this space. Other countries have understood that Wi-Fi is the new electricity, and therefore they make sure that all parts of the country have access to internet, and they can go ahead and be innovative and creative, set up industry, set up jobs for themselves, be innovative, etc. So I think that government may not do, to expect some things from developing African governments, etc., is sometimes expecting a lot, but they can do things like easing access to internet, especially given the character of millennials and generally the youth. You want to tap into the internet and Wi-Fi space, which is a new, in a new world. There's a space, there's a new land that exists in space where businesses are also thriving. So I think those are things I would want our leaders to look into.
Thank you very much, Lawel. I'm not surprised that you began off on the issue of rights, and that is, typical of a law student. But the concern around labor rights still is where I pose a question to you, because you've just come out to give you at least some time to explore your mind, and the issue of labor rights. Is that an indictment on the labor unions, for example? That in the past, actually, labor unions, and I said this before, that labor unions would make and break governments. But it seems like in Uganda and in many other developing countries, labor unions have been either deliberately weakened for, of course, obvious reasons. Do you think they have the backbone to actually hold the government accountable to regulate on the rights of workers, but also to advocate for things like minimum wage, like Mercy mentioned earlier on? Do you think they have that capacity, or they're just like any institution that has been absorbed by the state?
So I think I have had politicians say that, do you expect government to bring you a job and give it to you? Do you expect government to just get money and bring it at your home? Most of us really don't understand the role of government, because government determines the activities we engage in. Government has the coercive power to coerce us to abide by its policies. I don't know if you get. I think a lot of this starts and begin with the structure of government. Is that as much as we understand that trade unions and employees coming together to demand for their rights is the ideal, you exist in a government which does not want that, which is more interested perhaps in consolidation of power and maybe promoting patriotism as opposed to activism, for example, that concerns labor rights. So you do not have a lot of those. You only have maybe teacher NATO, is it?
NATO. You
have NATO, you have Muhwezi, but also the breaking of cooperatives and the privatization, structure adjustment, etc. Had an effect on all these things. So I think as much as we all understand that these trade unions would be the best platform to demand for these labor rights, government has no incentive to have any entity that has capacity to come together and demand for anything.
Sure.
Yes, not just labor rights, but all kinds of rights.
Yeah,
Yes.
Lawel, thank you very much. Scovia, just a second. I want to bring in Koma right at that point. Because Lawel says many things begin and fall with government. Koma, you sit at the NRM Secretariat. You're the party in power. And Lawel is putting an indictment and saying that your government has no interest whatsoever in strengthening these these labor rights institutions, but also corporations in general, and that it is to your interest that they are weak, so that they don't, at the end of the day, pose a challenge to your governance.
That's not true, obviously, but that's his opinion. Maybe just to tackle him from the beginning is try and think about. You may not answer this now, but you said government should ignore agriculture and focus on industrialization. Where do you think raw materials come from? Because the other raw materials that you get, like minerals, are exhaustible. But the major raw materials for industrialization that you cannot exhaust come from the agricultural sector. So that is just for that. Now, on the issue of these activists, labor activists and all that, you see, first of all, I agree with him when he says that it was a mistake for government to tax the internet. I don't think it is right. Because like I said, my foundation in economics begins with the best. I think ICT over the years and the internet has evolved into not just a platform, but even a factor of production. Which you cannot ignore. And maybe later on, when we were discussing future prospects, I hope I'll get some time to so that we talk about the fourth industrial revolution and the internet. But for the issue of labor activists and all these unions, you see, first of all, we're not interested. I don't think government is interested in shutting down and coercing these movements. That one is absolutely
no.
not true.
I think what Lawel is trying to say
is that true is that we are interested.
Some NGOs remain closed up to today.
Yeah, we'll talk about that.
I think that's the point that Lawel is trying to put across.
Yeah, I will get to that. I think what we are interested in as the NRM government is political stability. That is what we are interested in, which is one of the enabling aspects of a thriving private sector.
That's true.
Okay, but Kidega, to go to the root of this.
So see, what threat do NGOs pose to political?
First, I'm getting to this.
Political stability.
Okay, I am getting to this first, to the root of his argument. You see, the structure of our society is not Europe. Many of these labor movements actually thrive in a class system, a proper class system. Okay, where interests are clearly defined. Okay. Right now, if you got a labor movement, whose interests are they going to represent? You don't even have a clear middle class that you can point to. Okay?
But it could be around those particular
it is a very difficult thing. Okay? It is very difficult. But we have, I think what we have is, especially the political parties that have been very key in this. Okay? Who are, of course, the key pillars of our democracy in representing some of these interests. Because at least they are, I think we can all agree, most of the political parties in Uganda are broad-based. Yes. Okay, we have all sorts of classes of people there. You cannot clearly say this political party represents the interests of the bourgeoisie. You cannot point at it. They are all there. Okay, and if you look at, for instance, in the NRM, we have what we call the Workers' League. Okay, that has a structure from the village, okay, to the national level, and they have a representative in the topmost decision-making organ of the party, the Central Executive Committee.
Isn't it problematic
now
that we want to leave some of these very vital structures of building any society to political players? That you would rather have a political party advancing the interest of laborers than an actual labor union?
You see, the question that I asked is, who is legitimate? Is it a white man who comes out of some country, maybe let's say the US, and comes to say he's standing here to represent the interests of laborers here? Or is it a clear structure? Because political parties are not just made of oblivious structures. They are made of warm bodies that are the grassroots, okay? Listening to the issues of people and bringing them up, okay? And bringing them up to the right platforms, because we have the institutional mechanism. You have parliament there. Now, the issue of the, for instance, the minimum wage just been discussed in Parliament. Actually, in 2015, there is a bill that was passed there, but the president is sitting on it, and he has his reasons. He has his reasons. You may disagree with him. I personally disagree with him, but he has his reasons, and his argument is that you are not going to have an industrial revolution when you are subjecting foreign investors to high cost of labor. That is his argument, and that is his only argument. Okay, you are not going to achieve that. How are you going to begin bringing in people here that engage in mass production? Okay, when you are putting high labor, your cost of labor is high, and that's why I keep referring back to the base,
but the economic base. Production.
Okay,
there is land. We can subsidize on land. We can subsidize on other things.
Yes, but labor is very essential.
Yes, it is sensitive, yes. But there are other factors of production where we can subsidize and say, because labor involves the rights of an individual is at stake. Why can't we at least, cover that first? Then we can, compensate. But maybe
let me just say this.
Let me just bring in Scovia.
Just 1 minute. What government is emphasizing is not job seekers. It's job creators. Okay? We want you to be able to create that labor force.
Then you open the internet.
Okay?
Yes.
And that's why I think that tax has been withdrawn.
Let us create more jobs on the internet.
And I agree with that. And maybe later we'll begin discussing the fourth industrial revolution.
Sure. We shall get there. Scovia, the issue around labor externalization, I think to me it's a big burden. It's a very big problem that we have young people who leave this country with the hope and aspirations of finding greener pastures. Okay, they go to Oman, they go to the Middle East countries and all there. But when they reach there, the issue around the bilateral agreements that Uganda has with other countries cannot protect them. Okay, our foreign missions, for example, our embassies, how much are they doing to ensure that the bilateral agreement that Uganda signs with these countries is actually upheld? That if we agree that your laborers are going to come here and we are going to give them such and such working conditions, why then go ahead to abuse them? But also issues around access to basic social services or basic remedy is still lacking. For example, speak of the legal services that I am working in Oman, my boss abuses my rights, I don't know which legal remedy to take. So the question is two things. One, do you think there is need for us to develop a pre-departure curriculum that before these people move away from Uganda, we give them a curriculum? You're going to Oman, you need to know that Oman, this is their culture. Don't do this because it's against their culture. But also, these are the basic contacts that in case you want to access maybe legal services, call this contact. Do you think that pre-curriculum departure pre-departure curriculum is important? But also, how best can we address the issue of the rights of those workers who are not in Uganda, but are of Ugandan origin?
All right. I'm going to take you a little bit back. I really needed to make a point when Lawel and Komakech were speaking. Komakech keeps saying that we need to go back to the basics. And if we are to talk about labor unions, we cannot ignore the fact that, first of all, right, over 64% of our youth are unemployed, or they're employed in the informal sector, i.e. they have their own businesses. And labor unions are effective when you have an employer, right? You can't really have labor unions where, like, if I have my own business and then I, decide that I need to join a labor union to advocate for my rights and all of that, like, that does not make sense because you're your own boss, right? And so by saying that, we don't need labor unions or labor unions are ineffective in Uganda, especially when it comes to advocating for rights, we ignore the fact that actually a majority of Ugandans would not be able to benefit from some of those, for lack of a better word, benefits again that those labor unions provide. Anyways, moving on to the question that you just posed. To start with the pre-departure curriculum, I think if we focus on providing people, yes, it is a very good idea to kind of prep people for, what to expect, what to do when you're in trouble, who to contact and all of that. But at the same time, I think we are, neglecting the nature of abuse here, right? We are forgetting that many of these, especially domestic workers, when they go into these countries, their passports are taken away, their telephones are taken away, and so they are essentially imprisoned within those homes that they're working at. And we only hear stories, like the extreme stories, when something happens, like someone died, and therefore their body needs to be repatriated. Right? We don't have. I guess you can only prepare someone to a certain level when they are going to be immersed in an abusive situation, right? That they literally have no way of getting out of. But one of the things that I see and recommend is the kind of informal networks that these people form within those countries, the sort of communities that they build, and therefore use those communities to share information. Because in many cases, a lot of people don't report their whereabouts to the consulates, and so the embassies themselves will be kind of incapacitated and won't be able to effectively act. But the networks that they've formed are the ones that are actually doing the everyday check-ins, right? Like, hey, sending you a text, are you okay? How is everything? If they actually have access to those phones, or in many cases, right, like, you know, someone who works in the other home and the other home and type of like that. And then when their bosses visit each other, because, you know, these homes are usually also in those forms of networks that somebody knows somebody that knows somebody, and that's how people share information and get to understand and know about the well-being of others. And so prepping these girls to actually be able to, like a buddy system type of thing, like have a buddy who can check on you and who you can check on.
So, but are you saying that we should rely on the casual and social networks and not rather putting up policies that actually can solve these issues once and for all? Should we rely on, hey buddy, are you well? Or we should have policies that actually, you know, entrench on the, entrench some of these values.
Maybe let me
Absolutely. If we're talking about policies,
let me just
right?
bring in Mercy, because now we have gone to policy. I have to get the mind of a lawyer.
Can I just say something, then she can come in? Right? We cannot, like, our policies here are already failing.
Okay.
We are failing at, adhering to our own bilateral arguments at home here.
At home,
how else do we expect to, like, monitor and right, protect the girls and boys who are away?
For too much.
Right. It's not that it's asking for too much. It's just saying, I'm saying that there are alternatives, especially if we cannot rely on the government to protect us.
Okay, fair enough.
Maybe
just 1 second. I need to bring in Mercy.
lady, so
Yeah, she has been quiet. Mercy is still on the issue of labor migration, and because this is a fundamental concern to me, because we think we are addressing the problem, yet we are actually not. Because these young people leave Uganda, go and work wherever they work, and 2-3 years down the road, they are back to square one. Okay, so it looks like we have a knee-jerk. Sorry, not we, but I think this whole labor migration is a knee-jerk reaction. It does not solve the problem entirely. Do you think there is need for us to address this labor issue from a domestic perspective, and not rely on this labor migration as an alternative, but also these laborers who go to work, what is their contribution to the country's GDP? I think most of them go work and don't even bother to save money. So they come back and they are back to square one. They're back to zero. So 2 questions. Do you think that this labor migration or this labor exportation addresses the problem in the long run, or it's a knee-jerk reaction? 2, do these laborers or these workers who go outside, do they have capacity to influence on the domestic economy?
Yeah, well, thank you.
Because then they'll go and work, come invest here and have a business, and
Okay, thank you, moderator. First and foremost, I want you to allow me to appreciate the fact that labor externalization, it has actually solved unemployment. That one, I want us to appreciate it. You're all aware that every year, like 7,000 people do go abroad, and not everyone get issues like the way we already see. There are some success stories. Yes, there are some success stories. These people have helped. They have paid school fees for their kids, for their families, and a lot of things they have bought fruits around the town. Me, I know them. I know them actually. So I want us to first appreciate that fact that they always bring the money into the country. We have to appreciate that fact. Maybe to come in.
But maybe that is where we look at illicit financing, that the money comes in, but through means that is hard to trace, through means that the government cannot tax, through means that we cannot even trace its investment later on. So it ends up getting lost just in its transition, and it's never seen tangibly on ground. Maybe it has put up a structure somewhere.
That one, they do.
Yeah, okay.
Models have told me, I know. Actually, I know that.
Okay,
The things from the ground I've ever seen success stories.
Oh,
yes,
interesting,
I've
yeah.
seen. But maybe to come in, the challenge is one that we've been facing is that when you look about our laws that govern Uganda, Uganda is a democratic state. We do governed by the constitution, where we embrace equality. Besides your gender, besides your sex, besides your color, you do that. But the challenge comes in when we sign a bilateral agreement with other countries. You get where those countries they're autocratic states.
Autocratic states.
Yes, where you never know, they have not embraced the issue, that point of principle of equality. It is not there. So sometimes it's hard. We Ugandans, we can sign, but for them there are those things they are not, respecting. So at the end of the day, it's hard for them to follow our laws than they follow their Sharia laws. So I find that's a challenge.
But at least can we agree to the bare minimum that we have put on paper?
Okay. Yes, moderator. So what I think, what should be done? Actually, it is already there. Ugandans, we do have laws. You have clear laws, we have clear policies, everything. But practically, it is sometimes it's hard for us.
Okay.
I mean, those bilateral agreements, they do always sign that they provide labor officers in different embassies. And this one has not been done. So I feel like the government, it should come in and, allocate resources, financial resources to those different embassies to make sure those labor officers are there to handle such issues on a daily basis. You get. Sometimes it is hard maybe for companies. Sometimes it may be hard for companies to solve such issue. The issue may arise, but we find a company, they cannot deal with it. So I have a feeling if the government puts in that to every embassy, I feel like we can solve that.
Okay, fair enough. Let me bring in Comrade Lawel. Lawel, it looks like if we are to address the issue of the labor force, we must address the economy. I feel like those two go in tandem. One influences the other. So the issue of the economy, our country seems like it has adopted, and Koma emphasized this earlier on, it's a private sector-led economy, where even the social services in this country, like healthcare, education, are in the hands of private players. I think this, whereas it is a good thing, it's equally problematic because the private player only looks at making profit, and issues that you're trying to advance around human rights, around bare minimum wage, it is alien to them. Yeah. So what way for the economy? Because if we address the economy, then we somehow address the issue of the labor.
No, Kidega, private individuals do not have a choice whether to respect labor rights or not. They are supposed to observe them. So I think as much as they are profit oriented, they don't have a choice of doing it at the expense of people's rights, etc. I think what the problem we are faced with, especially with our economy, is that full labor rights seem to be, and other things, incentives, things like wage, the wage rate, etc., minimum wage, seem a luxury to us currently because of the mismatch between the labor supply and available jobs. Because there is competition for the little jobs, and therefore, like I said, there is no incentive to provide all of these. And the president recognizes that people don't have jobs, and then you're saying that and you want a minimum wage, right? So I don't know if you get it.
Yeah.
So it is not necessary. The incentive does not exist now. For us to reach there, we must achieve some level of economic development. For us to enjoy those. But I think that we must strike a balance, especially to do with rights. We have these laws, occupational health, the one of 2006 Employment Act, etc., which talk about available remedies for workers who are abused, maybe those who are cut by machines, strict vicarious liability, etc. Those exist. We must strike a balance. But I think the bigger problem is that there's a mismatch between the labor supply and the available jobs, which therefore means the people who are providing jobs don't have the incentive to pay us well. But I also wanted to have some response to what he talked about. Trade unions, and he says that for us to have trade unions, we must have class systems. I think it's a mechanical way of thinking, because I think we have, for example, Uganda Medical Association, which brings together doctors. You have the one of interns, you have the one of teachers and Muhwezi academic staff.
That's true.
I think we can still have these, and I am forced to believe that we can have better solutions from those entities than we can get from politicians. We can get better health conditions from doctors striking than politicians speaking in parliament. And for example, we've had an increase in the salaries. I think if they could shift from just demanding for their salary increments to better equipment like gloves and all these things, we were likely to have them.
And PPEs.
Yes, they seem to be achieving. The alternative he talks about, which is political parties, he makes it seem like they have the incentive to let alternative political parties who have the incentive to fight for our rights thrive. I do not think they have demonstrated that. Talking about these guys who go outside, I came across a video of some girl, I think called Monica from Isinjiro, who jumped from a tall building down. I think as much as we say they are success stories, we must be seen to value, even if it is a single life that we lose because of the carelessness of the state, which has the responsibility over all these citizens that get out. I mean, even if it is one life, even if it is two lives, it should be a cause for alarm. I don't think that, even if you had 100 people giving back money, I don't think that a loss of life, which could have been avoided by better supervision, is worth it. So
every life matters.
Yes, every life matters. So I think I understand that governments like ours don't have a lot of negotiating power, but I think the bare minimums we can achieve, we have a duty to protect our citizens. But I also think things like brain drain, where you have the best of our doctors going out, I think they have an effect. I think the more we continue not, to provide better working conditions, you have countries like Rwanda and other even the US, in NASA, you have a lot of brilliant young guys who are taken. The cream of our nation don't come back to serve our country. Most of them, get out of the country. There's an interview during the lockdown. I think Canary was interviewing the president about oil. And the president said, this country can thrive without oil. There are countries which have thrived because of the human resource. He gave an example of Japan. And I think he's true to that extent. But, to what extent? And as we discuss this thing of labor, I think we also need to discuss the idea of the quality of the labor we produce. And for us to have a quality labor out there to develop our country, like the president asserts, we must also invest in our education. There was some discussion, I think, that Tumusime Mutebide's lecture about people's access to education. I think government, as we look at the labor, the quality, the rights, we must also understand what feeds, what produces this labor, which is education. I think government, this is the part where we talk about moving forward. Government should also invest more.
Just before you move towards that part, just one question to you is that, do you think international law, has capacity to hold sovereign states accountable to their treaties? That if we have a treaty between Uganda and Oman, does the international law framework have that capacity to ensure that state A meets the end of the bargain and state B as well does the same?
I think if we are to say, legally speaking, those are superior laws, and therefore perhaps they bind us. But I think we need to discuss the pragmatics, the capacity to monitor, supervise, implement, and all these things vis-a-vis the country's autonomies, etc. You get? I think the law, of course, legally speaking, hierarchy of laws, they bind us, but the pragmatics speak otherwise.
Is still lacking.
And all those things. So what I want us not to drive away from, I think we also need to discuss the quality of our labor. How do we stop brain drain, have the best people develop our country? How do we increase access to education and increase the quality of education and all these things? I think, again, I think rarely do I agree with the president. I think the future of every country also depends on the quality of its human resource. And therefore, we should invest more in education. We should, even when there is mismatch in the labor market, we must be able to strike a balance. And like I started with, it is important that I didn't say agriculture is not important, but I talked about prioritization. Prioritization means you do not leave other sectors, but you concentrate more on this. I think we can have, some allocations in agriculture, but I think we must put our priorities straight, and that is industrialization. It's about trade and exchange. It's about having a lot of jobs for our people.
I am glad that you quantified the issue of access to education with quality of education, because we can have people going to school, but what is the quality? Mercy, just my last question to you is, let's speak about labor mobility. That if we are to address this issue of unemployment, we must address labor mobility. And even to begin with East Africa, just for example, the East African Employment Treaty, the East African Mobility policy is that, yes, you can move from Uganda to Kenya, yes, to Rwanda, but a low degree in Uganda may not mean the same degree in Kenya, okay? And that if you go to Kenya with your low degree, it might not mean as much, and therefore you'd have to get, enrolled into that system, and maybe they might require you to sit, maybe give an exam. So do you think that if we are to encourage labor mobility, we must streamline the law, for example, beginning with East Africa, then eventually we can be maybe ambitious to say streamline the law in Africa as well, but let's begin with East Africa. Can we streamline that labor mobility law so that my degree in Uganda means the same? I can go to Kenya and work as a medical doctor without having to go through any exam, Do you think we can streamline that as East Africa?
Yeah, I think we...
Or we are focusing on issues around closing our borders and,
No, I think we should do as we have the East African community. I think as long as, I think we should do it whereby it is easy for me to go to Rwanda. Maybe I have my law degree from Uganda. I go to Rwanda, and they should not actually, if we are to base on the principles of the East African community, we should advance
that cause, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, Koma, my last question to you is, it is you who focused on the World Bank report. I also come across a World Bank report that posed a very significant question, that does Uganda have capacity to leverage from its demographic advantage? That we have young people who form, you have all told us the numbers, but does Uganda have capacity to leverage from this demographic transition?
Yeah, maybe, Kidega, I was left out on the question of labor externalization.
Oh, sure, you can give it.
I'll just use 1 minute. You see, first of all, yes, there are bilateral agreements. But in the first instance, what you need to know is that there are individuals in Uganda here who, due to push or pull factors, have already made a choice, a deliberate choice, to move out and seek employment from outside of the country. That is the first thing. Now, because of that, in the absence of formal institutional mechanisms or legal frameworks to protect these people, then you have the issue of traffickers coming in. And when traffickers come in, of course, their initial objective is how much money can I get out of this deal? Traffickers do not even connect someone to a job. They basically just take you and throw you to a country and you look for
modern day slavery.
Now, you see, and that's why, because there were some voices some time back that government should what? Should ban, should put a ban on these migrant workers moving to certain countries like Oman. But you see, actually government did that. But by 2010, when government was doing that, there were already 40,000 migrant workers, Ugandans, in Oman. 40,000. You see? And that is where now bilateral agreements come in. Currently, I think government has bilateral agreements with about 3 countries. You have the Kingdom of Jordan, then you have the UAE, and then the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
And then they're in the process of working out with Qatar and Turkey and Oman, I think. But you see, the challenge with these bilateral agreements is that in any country or in anything, first of all, as a general principle, there's good and bad in everything. Even here we have laws, but don't you have people here who mistreat their workers here?
That's true.
And that's the same thing, even with the laws the other side. But Kidega, the biggest problem has been traffickers. And secondly, like we had discussed earlier, is there are individuals who move into a certain country, okay, using the formal process. But once they reach there, they see other opportunities maybe more paying opportunities, and then they move into those opportunities and do not inform the consulate. Okay, and that becomes difficult for for them to be traced and tracked and helped. But also, what you also need to know is that it has not all been bad, like she said. I think by 2020, government was getting about $600 million repatriated from just the Middle East. Okay, so it has not all been bad, and I know there are a lot of young people whose lives have been transformed from these opportunities. So there is opportunity in every crisis for young people.
That's true.
And would encourage them to look at it that way. Of course, government needs to strengthen the regulatory frameworks.
Yeah.
But ideally, the bilateral agreements should be aligned to some of the international statutes. Okay. But monitoring those, government does not have the capacity. By 2020, I think government had only about five full-time staff in the externalization department here in Uganda. 5. And yet, I think we have almost over 100,000 migrant workers in just the Middle East. So there's a challenge. There's also a challenge of we don't have embassies in some of these countries, like in Oman, Bahrain. I don't know if we now have them. By last I checked, we didn't have them. We didn't have that representation there. So that has also been a challenge. But moving first to the solution.
Yeah.
I think the solution is true, like you said, is that lies in fixing the economy. It is only fixing the economy that will keep people here safe. And fixing the economy lies in government grabbing the opportunity not to be left behind like we have been left historically, to venture into the 4th industrial revolution. Okay?
Yeah.
The 4th industrial revolution is coming with a lot of opportunities. It's basically is a technological revolution that is thinning the line between the physical, biological, and the digital. And that is why you have good technologies coming in like blockchain that are bringing in digital currencies. You have the market now shifting to the digital space. Okay? And that is why during the lockdown, you saw companies like Jumia were able to run down big supermarkets like Game.
Yeah.
Because that's where the market is shifting. Okay? Just the other day, I was watching CNN, and Microsoft was projecting that there are going to be 150 million jobs in the next 5 years within this industrial revolution. You see? So the role now of government is to ensure that this opportunity and we have a very young population. I'm not answering your question of the World Bank.
Yes.
We have a very young population.
Yeah.
Yeah? We have a population that almost 20 million of them are 16 years and below. And we have an opportunity that is historical to leverage, especially with education first. We must provide the necessary education that will fit the skills in this sector. And the jobs that this sector provides of data analysts, data scientists, robotic engineers are jobs that are not just small paying jobs. It is okay to venture into commercial agriculture and other things, but imagine having a job, even if we just tap into 10% of the 150 million of those jobs and have 10 million people earning $100,000 every year. That is the future of the world. Today, that is where the world is moving into.
Okay.
And I believe that is where government should leverage on the current population demographic, and we move to that direction.
Amazing, amazing.
Yeah.
So, Scovia, you had a concern. I'll give you 1 minute. Then I will ask you all in a space of 30 seconds to give your final remarks. So I'll begin with Scovia. Scovia, you have a minute. The rest have 30 seconds. So we shall move like that towards the end. Your last words to the viewers.
Yes. So to begin with, I think we've been talking about bilateral agreements and how bilateral agreements in their essence are supposed to provide protection under a legal system, right? And if we look at the people who are going to the Gulf states, right, these are people who are coming from poverty, people who are essentially looking for a way out, looking for opportunities. And when they go there, there is that employer-employee relationship, which means that there is a power imbalance, right? And so when they get there and they're in harm's way, most of these people cannot actually afford to sue their employers. And those who are, like those who unfortunately, right, get killed or are incapacitated or become disabled, and they come back, their families themselves cannot, right, be able to then go ahead and say, I'm this Ugandan from, let's say the person was from Pakwach. This Ugandan from Pakwach who is going to start suing someone in Oman or Jordan or whatever, right? That is impossible. And so what government should actually be doing is right? Like taking those legal actions or those legal means. But again, our government has failed our people in a whole lot of ways that it's my turn to talk, so let me talk. You can disagree later on, right?
A new debate.
I'm sorry. Yeah, our government has failed our people in a whole lot of ways, and one of the reasons why people are actually seeking those opportunities out there, knowing very well the risks that they might incur, is because of government failure to provide opportunities for the youth. And even when the youth set up their businesses, like we said earlier, right, they're heavily taxed that those businesses die after 1 year of their inception. And so moving forward, we should really, really look into the barriers or things that inhibit the youth from flourishing in this country, be it unemployment or setting up their own businesses. We've talked a lot about diversifying the economy, and of course, that is possible, right? As I mentioned earlier, the Ugandan youth are very entrepreneurial, right? They don't need people to tell them that they're lazy, that's why they're unemployed, or they don't know how to look for jobs, that's why they're unemployed. The fact of the matter is that we do not have those opportunities, and even when we go and create those opportunities for ourselves, we're killed by the taxes, or we're really, really inhibited by government policies and government failure.
Okay, thank you. 30 seconds as we move towards the end.
I am a very optimistic person. First of all, we live in a global village, and we must learn to be global citizens. You cannot just constrict yourself to this part of Africa, this banana republic. There are a lot of opportunities out there, for me, I encourage young people who have the skills to actually go out there and tap into these opportunities. What I would like to urge the government to do is to tap into this fourth industrial revolution so that Africa is not left behind. We need to reposition our education system to begin skilling young people that we have. This huge labor force of over 20 million young people, if we can just realign them, okay, to focus on this, these guys will be our launching pad into a modern Uganda. And for me, if only the things that I think government should tap into, should do moving forward is one, invest in research, like the Americans did with clean energy. Invest in research and show some of these small-scale business and startups the way. Where are the areas to invest in this revolution? Okay. Secondly, of course, there are fears that government has to do with governance. By the way, even the revolution also has ushered in alternative means of governance. You saw President Trump in his entire tenure was governing on Twitter.
Yeah.
These days, to actually even access some of your documents, like a passport, you don't need to go to Internal Affairs to initiate the process. We are now moving towards that. And today, the tasks that were being done in factories by human beings are increasingly getting automated. And these jobs are dying out. And it's a fact. Xi Jinping says that he's now moving China away from the physical labor to automated machines, to be the powerhouse of automated machinery that will increase efficiency in the factories. So these jobs, the physical jobs, are not going to be there anymore. That's where the world is going, and we must look at the world from the perspective of the global village. We now must go digital, and government has no option. They have to show us the way, and they should begin by the 20 million young people who still have the possibility of beginning a fresh education to move forward.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Mercy?
Well, thank you, moderator and my comrades. All what I can tell the young people out there is that do not lose hope. We've talked a lot. We've talked about the challenges we are facing, but do not lose hope. Let's just try to work on our mindset. However much you have your degrees, however much you went to good schools, please let's do have mindset change. If there is anything that you can do, maybe a business, and maybe you're professional in something, but you haven't gotten a job, please try to be flexible. Feel free, go do it, all be right. Everything will be okay along the way. Yeah, that's what I can tell you. Otherwise, it was nice to have you today. My comrades, Thank you so much. Yep.
Yes, Lawel.
When Komakech was speaking, I was smiling. You know, he was sounding all this sweet. I hope his political decisions are also as sweet. Because if we are prescribing talking about in the fourth generation industrialization, etc., you must have leaders in positions who understand that. You cannot have leaders who have grown and have second generation kind of thinking, take fourth generation industrialization decisions. So I hope perhaps parties like NRM can give people like Komakech those positions of decisions, because with him, you can be sure that the decisions will be taken in lieu of what he understands. I hope that point is well understood. I also want us to disabuse ourselves from Kidega's alternative of widening tax base, because you're essentially saying we should tax most or everyone, but you understand part of the challenge is, we are taxing startups who, a youth has started something, next day there is KCC on their door, you have URA, and, they can't meet their first birthday. I don't know if you get. So I think moving forward, I want to agree we should embrace, technology, industrialization, like he was talking about. We should invest more in education, but also everything starts and ends with government, with people we put in positions that enable them to carry out these decisions. You get. So like I started with this closing remark with, if we want to embrace technology and embrace the new market, tap into the 150 million jobs he's talking about, what we need are not second generation leaders. It is 21st century leaders.
Amazing. What
let's review our decision making mechanism. Thank you so
we need
much.
wise leaders.
Amazing.
But just as a closing statement, the next generation of billionaires are CEOs of tech giants like Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg, and that's where we should move into. And I believe with the wisdom
and that
of
means
Mosaic,
we remove the internet limitation.
we will move that. Leadership is about,
You can give your closing remark, please.
This is the only debate.
There is
the only debate.
the matriarch here will finish me.
Thank you very much to our viewers. You've spared the time to listen to this episode of the Youth Roundtable. To the panelists, Comrade Lawel, Comrade Mercy, Comrade Koma, and Comrade Scovia, it's always a pleasure to have you, and thank you for sparing the time to give our viewers a piece of your mind. I'm sure they've learned a thing or two. The technical team, Comrade Rashid and the rest, it's always a pleasure that you have this show run on time and get our viewers to view this right on time. My last words on this show are the words of Martin Luther King, who said that in whatever you do, believe that it has value, but also believe that it has power to change the world. But the last and most significant statement is that in whatever you do, just be the best at it. If you're a sweeper, sweep that road and let everyone be amazed at how clean the road is. If you're a teacher, teach those students. Just be the best at what you're doing. From us at the Youth Roundtable, it has been glad having you, and see you next week. Bye-bye.